All right, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the last day of Disease-Focused Crop Hour Week. If you've attended the other days of this week, I hope you've enjoyed it. Just a reminder, because I'll probably forget to say it at the end, please make sure you fill out your surveys that we send out, because that really helps us kind of drive how crop hour is done and make sure that we're addressing stuff that you're interested in. As you may have saw in the looped PowerPoint, we do have a workshop or a webinar workshop that's going to be a much deeper dive into tar spot in March. We'll have experts from all over the country coming in, so you'll kind of get some education starting today with Dr. Bish, and then we'll be able to keep adding on to that and growing that education in March if you attend that as well. If you don't know me, my name is Madeline Shires, and I'm the SDSU Extension Plant Pathology State Specialist. Also on listening in today is Connie Shrunk, who is our SDSU Extension Plant Pathology Field Specialist based out of Sioux Falls. And then our speaker today is Dr. Mandy Bish from the University of Missouri. She will start her presentation here in a couple of minutes. We just wanted to give a quick update on corn diseases here in South Dakota in 2024. As many of you may know, we confirmed 46 counties for tar spot at some level in 2024, and it was all late season arrivals, so we started seeing it in mid to late August. So we don't believe that it was yield limiting, but it is showing up earlier and earlier in the state, so it is definitely something that we're wanting to keep an eye on and get everyone educated about. Southern rust was also notable, and I think that was probably notable for most states. We saw tons and tons of southern rust in at least 46 counties. It was probably more, but we had scouted a lot and we ran out of time before harvest. And then BLS has also been one that we're seeing a bit. We've had a lot of questions coming in about some of the different, symptoms and why they're seeing what they're seeing. So we are working on that. We'll hopefully have an update via a publication about some of the bacteria questions that we're having. But right now we don't have a ton on that. But yeah, I think that is everything for corn diseases here. Overall, it was not too crazy of a year outside of tar spot. So speaking on that, we will let Dr. Bish start her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Madeline, and thank you all for having me here today. You all have an awesome team at South Dakota State, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to chat a little bit with you about tar spot today and some of our experiences in Missouri. I think Missouri is a lot warmer than South Dakota, but as Madeline was talking, it seems like we have a lot of similar issues. So let's talk about tar spot today. Again, my name is Mandy Bish. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Missouri and our state extension crop pathologist. And I always just want to start out with our team because it always takes a team in any organization. And I'm fortunate to have a team who is helping with our tar spot research and also helping with some of the other areas in the state. And Pong Tian is our diagnostician who is extremely helpful. Okay, so tar spot in Missouri, these are some images from 2024. And if you have not seen the disease, these little black lesions form on the leaf surface and you cannot scrape them off. They form on the top and the bottom of the surfaces of the leaf. They can form on husk as well. And that's tar spot. And in 2024, estimates were 0 to 60 bushels per acre yield losses. Okay, so I want to highlight here, we get attracted to that 60 bushels per acre yield loss, but there were also 0 bushels per acre yield losses in some fields too, okay? And so while today I don't have an easy button for you or a crystal ball to look in to tell you exactly the magic cure-all solution for tar spot, we do have enough information that we can resist the urge to hit the panic button. And so the goal today is talk a little bit about walking back from the panic button. And to do that, I want to start with a little background on tar spot, okay? So tar spot was first confirmed in the US in 2015 in this area of, my computer just died. Okay, Madeline, if you cannot see my screen, please tell me, but I'm assuming everything's okay on your end. So this map here that you can see, hopefully, is where tar spot started. It was first confirmed in the US in 2015 in Indiana and Illinois, okay? And since that time, has just spread, as you see. Now, one important aspect of tar spot is that we were not anticipating it in the US. And so I think that's an important point because it kind of drives some of our panic. When I think of other diseases that have entered the US, and maybe some of you are too young to remember the scare of soybean rust, we were anticipating soybean rust entering the US. So even 20 years before soybean rust came to the US, at Fort Detrick, Maryland, they were studying the pathogen that causes soybean rust, getting to know it, understanding the conditions that led to its spread. And we really did not have that luxury with tar spot. It just kind of appeared. And so we were doing what is kind of called reactive research. And thankfully, there are a lot of good state extension pathologists in the area where it began occurring. And they really started this reactive research to get a good understanding and continue optimization of tar spot management. So, the research, it first appeared in 2015. The first real big outbreak where a lot of research data was gathered was 2018. Then again in 2021, they were able to collect a lot of data from high epidemic years. Okay, in 2019, 2020, 2022, they were able to collect good data also in low epidemic years. So another emphasis on that not every year is an epidemic with tar spot. Okay, and so we really don't want to hit the panic button because hitting the panic button can be costly, right? So I just want to start out with a couple reasons why not. So tar spot is not water hemp or palm or amaranth. I confess I'm not sure which pigweed is more problematic in your area, but the reason I say that is those plants are consistent pests that you have to deal with every year, pretty much regardless of the weather or environment. Tar spot is a disease caused by a pathogen. The weather and environment are going to heavily influence the severity in a given season. Again, not every season is an epidemic. And then the question becomes really, how can we most effectively minimize our losses from tar spot? Effectively being both protect yield and economically, how can we minimize our losses? The best way to do this, I think, is to step back and to start understanding the enemy, the pest, as the first step in managing the disease. And so the way I like to do this, just to keep everybody engaged, I don't have the interactive systems on this presentation, but just do a series of true falses and see how well you do with your knowledge of tar spot. Okay, so first question, true or false? Tar spot symptoms appear only after corn reaches the silking stage. So I'm just going to read the question a couple times, let you chew on it. Tar spot symptoms appear only after corn reaches the silking stage. Is that true or false? And the answer is false. Okay. Anytime you have corn tissue leaves, infection can occur. In Missouri, tar spot has been confirmed in June in both 2023 and 2024, as in some neighboring states. And this each time it was before the corn had reached tasseling or silking stage. And this is the type of infection we've really seen in June consistently. You will see a few lesions on the leaf surface. Again, we don't have the ear leaf out yet, so this is all below the ear leaf. And a lot of times at this stage where you have lesions just starting to form, you can mistake the tar spot lesions with insect frass. So insect poop or insect frass can be easily wiped off the leaf, usually. Sometimes you have to spit and scrub a little bit, but the insect frass will come off the leaf. It's usually only going to be on one side of the leaf, whereas the tar spot lesion is going to go on is going to penetrate both sides of the leaf. And so that's where we see most common mistakes and identification early in the season, okay? But again, tar spot can appear early in the season, and actually, um, that's one of the temptations I think that causes panic on jumping the gun with some of our fungicide applications. So when we see it at this stage, we're going to have time to monitor it before making that application. Okay, true or false? Tar spot fungal spores germinate best between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. True or false? Tar spot fungal spores germinate best between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is actually false. And it makes sense based on observations. The extended periods of air temperatures between 64 and 73 degrees are where it likes to be. And as I said, it makes sense with observations. You know, this first appeared in Illinois and Indiana and really moved north and west, even into Ontario, Canada, and Michigan. Okay, so that kind of corresponds with preference for cooler temperatures. We also have research data to complement our observations. So there is a predictive modeling initiative that's going on to try to optimize our understanding of these disease outbreaks, and it's really helped us with our understanding of tar spot outbreaks, okay? So we're collecting spores of the tar spot pathogen in the air each week. We're rating the corn for disease, and we're monitoring weather. And when you do this over many locations and have these large data sets, you can begin to develop models. And so those models have really gotten us to that optimum air temperature of 64 to 73 degrees, which again seems to fit with observations. And it fits with our May to June temperatures in Missouri. So we have those temperatures in May to June that can correspond to why we're seeing lesions start to form on the leaves in June. And I think in that March meeting that Madeline mentioned earlier, some of the key people who have led this initiative will be there and probably take deeper dives into some of this research. So I went in and cheated. I used Google, so do your own homework here. But just out of curiosity, what are the average 24-hour daily air temperatures in South Dakota during the growing season? And you can see that for most months of the season, you all are going to have favorable air temperatures for this disease, okay? We're still not going to panic, but just note and be aware that you do have favorable temperatures for this disease. All right, the next true or false question. The role of moisture in tar spot infections is not fully understood. The role of moisture in tar spot infections is not fully understood. And this is true, actually. You know, and I hear a lot of talk about we have to have moisture, we have to have moisture. So let's walk through why I call this true. First, we have a lot of modeling data, again, from those spore traps combined with observations and weather. And that indicates that the models indicate that you really don't need moisture for initial symptom development, okay? So that's the research side. Observation side, remember that I told you we saw tar spot outbreaks in June in 2023. Well, I have a feeling that you all are familiar with the drought monitor map, unfortunately. And this is what our June 2023 looked like. We had conditions in severe drought where we had tar spots show up in this northeast area. And it was dry enough that we didn't have dew in some places. So it was extremely dry, and we still saw some tar spot lesions. We also had tar spots show up in June in 2024, and we had a very different picture. We were still a little dry, but not like 2023. And so based on these observations and the modeling tool, it seems like maybe we don't need moisture to see tar spot initially, okay? But I do think that there is a role for moisture as the season progresses and as the disease develops, and this is based on observations. This was one example in Northeast Missouri under pivot irrigation, so we were able to get the yield outside the pivot, and there was about a 42 bushel per acre yield difference between irrigated and non-irrigated corn, with irrigated being the worst. Okay, so when I take all of this data together, what this suggests to me, this is Mandy's current speculation. You are getting the heavy hitters in March, so I would suggest you come and listen to them as well, who have been studying this longer than I've been in my position. Moisture does not seem to be needed for initial infection and disease symptoms. That's based on the modeling, and that's based on our own observations of seeing this disease show up in June. But we really have seen it spread, tar spot spread, when we have moisture included with the favorable temperatures. So I like to tell our farmers, in other words, temperature seems to be king. You have to be in that favorable temperature, but moisture can enhance the disease. All right. True or false? Spores of the tar spot pathogen can be moved in the air. Spores of the tar spot pathogen can be moved in the air. And this is true. Which makes sense again, based on that spore trapping, we can catch the spores in the air. Additionally, how it spreads. So in 2023 was the first time that we saw tar spots show up south of the Missouri River, and in the middle of the state. So we suspect there's something with the weather pattern around the rivers that allowed it to move, but it can spread in the wind, and that makes sense, right, with where we've seen it spread across geographies so quickly in the US. And I point this out because I get asked a lot of questions about residue management, and I think there's probably limited value with residue management, especially in areas where you have a multi-year history of tar spot. And that's just because this can move in the air. And as it more of it accumulates, it's going to be harder to reduce the amount of inoculum with residue management. Okay, we only have a couple more true-false questions. True or false, the fungus that causes tar spot can survive winter in the United States. The fungus that causes tar spot can survive winter in the United States. And this is true. Ontario, Canada is where we get some of our best research data on tar spot. So I would imagine that those temperatures are probably cooler in the winter than South Dakota's temperatures. So even though you're cooler than Missouri, I think it still applies to you all. So in the disease, the infected tissue, I want to point out this part for the winter. The infected tissue dries down and returns to the field at harvest, and that fungus can overwinter in the infested residue and be spread and be ready for the spring and rains. So I'm showing quickly this tar spot disease cycle, but it's available at the Crop Protection Network. And if you want a good way to spend a few hours without noticing it, I recommend you visit the Crop Protection Network website. It has many resources. So on this infected tissue drying down, one of the things that was a little surprising this year in the fall with decorative corn, we have box stores that are selling decorative corn covered with tar spot. Now, when I saw this picture in Columbia, Missouri, where we've had tar spot, it wasn't too terrifying because we already have it here. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this corn had apparently made its way to areas where we do not have tar spot yet. So the fungus can survive on this corn. It's just another example of one avenue that it can be used to spread. Okay. True or false? Fish eyes around tar spot lesions indicate more severe damage than lesions without fish eyes. So the fish eyes, if you haven't seen tar spot with the fish eyes, so you can have lesions that are mostly just the black stroma, and then you can have this brown or necrotic ring around it, and that's what's called a fish eye. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what is the difference in this? Does it affect management? Okay. Well, the question, fish eyes around tar spot lesions indicate more severe damage than lesions without fish eyes, is false. We currently have not seen any differences as far as yield or management. Usually they're on the same leaves as in the picture as lesions that don't have the fish eye. There is some work out of Mexico, the country, which is where this disease was first identified in about 1905, that maybe there is another fungus that causes that brown ring around the black stromata, but we haven't seen that in the US yet. Okay, true or false? The fungus that causes tar spot only infects corn. The fungus that causes tar spot only infects corn. And this is true. So this might be one of the blessings of tar spot if we can have a blessing of it. It does not have alternative host. Now, there have historically been other diseases called tar spot, but they are not the same fungal pathogen as the pathogen that causes tar spot of corn, Filocaramatus. Okay, so they are the Filocaramatus, the fungal pathogen that can only infect corn. Some corn varieties are less susceptible to tar spot. True or false? Some corn varieties are less susceptible to tar spot. And this is true, and this is really a point to bring up, depending on your concern level and where you are in the state and how bad it's been. Um, the seed companies have gotten better about their ratings and have a good idea of which varieties are a little more tolerant to tar spot than other varieties. Initial work out of Dr. Tolenko's lab. So Dr. Tolenko is the state extension specialist at Purdue. She's been in the hot spot of this since it entered the US and has probably done the most research. So these are just three corn varieties. One is susceptible to tar spot, one is moderately resistant, or two are moderately resistant, sorry. And this is their yield. This is across 3 years in Indiana. So although you're only seeing an 8 bushel per acre increase in the moderately resistant yield over the susceptible yield, you have to consider this was, I believe, in 2019, 20, and 21. So this is 2 years of low tar spot outbreak and 1 year of high tar spot outbreak combined, and you're still seeing an increase in that moderately resistant hybrid. So again, this is worth checking out. And also, I believe Madeline mentioned that Dr. Tolenko will be here in that March series. Okay, and now the question that everybody wants to know, when should I spray, right? What does the crystal ball say about spraying? And so here are some of the questions that we're just going through with our farmers. What growth stage is the corn? If we are not at the ear leaf yet, there's a lot of data that suggests you don't want to jump the gun on spraying, even if you see those lesions show up early. How high in the canopy is tar spot? Again, we really want to protect that ear leaf and above. How many lesions are visible? We have, in Missouri, we have two types of farmers. We have the farmers who see a lesion on a leaf and want to go spray immediately, but that's likely not going to be a positive return on investment. We also have the farmers who have seen it for a couple years. We haven't had as much tar spot in their area, and they're getting a little complacent and not watching. So this is something that you want to keep monitoring because it can expand rapidly. But if you're only seeing 1 or 2 lesions and you're not quite to the ear leaf yet, you're really going to want to try to hold off spraying. Another consideration, what has the weather been like recently and what is the outlook? The weather again, is going to really play a role in how rapidly tar spots takes off once it's there. And then the question that really is from a practical standpoint, I understand that I don't fully get how difficult this can be, but how far out is the plane or helicopter? When can I get that application made? So at the end, if you can hang on till the end, I am going to show some data on drones versus planes with regards to tar spot, because maybe if there's a rule for drones here, it kind of takes the pressure off of point number 5 a little bit. Okay, so when should I spray? The Crop Protection Network has put out a table for tar spot, okay? And this table incorporates the observations and research of state extension pathologists, including Madeline and myself, and all across the US who are working on corn with tar spot, okay? To break down the table quickly, which you can get on the Crop Protection Network, and I'm glad to send the link to it if you have interest. If you ask 10 out of 10 state extension pathologists whether an application between BT and R3 is likely to result in a positive investment, you're probably going to get a mostly consensus answer. The VT to R3 application has been the most consistent across all the research data, okay? If you ask 10 state extension pathologists whether you should spray at dent or black layer, you're probably going to get a consistent answer. Okay, there is no second spray needed. When tar spot first came out, a lot of questions were, hey, if I spray this late, then maybe I'll reduce the amount of tar spot or the amount of inoculum for next year. And maybe that works initially, but now we have so much tar spot and we know it can move in the air that you're really not going to see the benefit of that late application. And the yield is already made. So, a lot of times we talk with my farmers and I'm like, it's probably going to look kind of scary by the end of the year, but the yield is already made. It's not going to take away the yield. And then if you ask 10 state extension pathologists whether you should spray it late vegetative or the R4, this is where we get a little inconsistent, okay? I'm going to show you a little bit of data on this. We have not really seen a benefit of this. This would be in a very special case, and I would suggest that if you are considering this, that you would reach out to Madeline with images and details on that potential. On the R4 applications, we have a couple studies. I'll show you one in a minute where there was a positive return on the chemical investment, but we have a lot of studies that suggest that maybe it's too late at that point as well. So these two are kind of questionable. Right here is the sweet spot as far as making that application. Okay, so probably the most complicated slide today, but an important one is the corn fungicide applications, tar spot, and the return on chemical investment. So this was done again by Dr. Tolenko's group at Purdue. Instead of focusing on tar spot and where it was, they focused on the growth stage of corn and they said, we're going to spray at these growth stages. And those growth stages are listed on the left side. Okay, so we have an early vegetative application, we have a 2-pass application, and then we have the optimal timings application, okay? They said we're going to spray each of these, and then we're going to see how well the fungicide application reduced tar spot symptoms, okay? They did this across multiple years, and they had 2 data sets. They had one where there was high tar spot outbreak, and they had one where there was low. I'm going to show you the results from the high tar spot outbreak year. Okay, so were the tar spot symptoms reduced? If there is a Y, that means yes. Yes, tar spot symptoms were reduced compared to non-treated. Okay, so you can see that these three applications, tar spot symptoms were reduced compared to no fungicide. And in the 2-pass application, symptoms were reduced, yes, compared to the non-treated. The other applications did not have a reduction in symptoms. And I should say, I believe the tar spot symptoms were rated at the R5 stage. So they could have had an initial reduction, but then by R5, you could not tell a difference between the fungicide application and non-treated. One challenge with tar spot, though, is that tar spot symptoms do not always correspond to yield. And so was yield protected in these applications? Okay, so, and again, this is a similar format. Anything with a Y is yes, they were protected compared to the non-treated, okay? So even though that V10, V11 did not have reduced symptoms, there was some yield protection there compared to the non-treated, statistically speaking. And so you can see that there was yield protection for many applications compared to the non-treated, and there was yield protection in that 2-pass. Okay, which you might expect given that you also saw yield protection with the 1-pass of VT-R1, okay? But just like tar spot symptoms do not necessarily correspond to yield, yield protection has to be a certain extent before you have a positive return on that chemical investment. And so Dr. Tolenko's group used corn prices estimated at $4.32, which might be a little lower than what we have today. And chemical applications, I believe, were calculated at about $40 per acre for the fungicide and the application. And so when you see the positive return on investment, even though you saw yield protection here, and even though you saw yield protection here, we didn't see a positive return on investment. There wasn't enough yield protection to offset the cost of that chemical application, okay? And so we see the positive return on investment here. Again, this dose stage is one of them that we don't as consistently see it, but we can see a positive return on investment, okay? again, I want to emphasize this is during a high tar spot severity outbreak, so greater than, I believe, 5% of the ear leaf covered. So they did this also with their low tar spot severity data sets, okay? And that's the next slide. It's the same format. So when they did not have tar spot severity, can you guess how many of these had reduced symptoms? Well, none, right? Because there was not high severity. There was not yield protection observed, and there was not a positive return on investment for any of the fungicide applications. So I think this is equally as important to point out because not every year is going to warrant that fungicide application. What about the fungicides? What fungicides seem to be effective? And most fungicides can reduce symptoms when you have a bad year. So this is an application was done at VTR1. This was done during 2021 when there was an epidemic in these states and Ontario, Canada. The lower the bar, the better. So this is reduction in tar spot severity compared to no fungicide treatment, okay? So you can see that all of them do reduce the severity of tar spot symptoms, okay? Which is a good thing, a VTR1 application, which I don't know about South Dakota, but in Missouri, if our farmers are going to apply, that's usually when they're going to apply anyway. So this is not really taking them out of their regiment for that. But what about the yield relative to non-treated corn? So this is all a relative increase to non-treated corn. Again, this was in that 2021 epidemic, okay? And so you can see different products behave differently, but they all are showing an increase of 8 to 20, almost 17 bushel per acre when you had high tar spot outbreak. And a couple things I do want to point out about this. Number one, those products that seem to have residual activity do seem to perform better with high tar spot outbreaks. The other thing is, I'm just showing you these graphs. This is a really good publication that summarizes on the Crop Protection Network some of the research information. And so that's where this graph came from. And the previous graph. And so if you want to go through this more detailed, that information is freely available to you on the Crop Protection Network, and it's the Bulletin 5015. Additionally, in the same work, multiple modes of action on disease severity and yield, the more modes of action you have, it seems to be better with regards to yield. This was data from Dr. Talenko's group in 2019 and 2020. Again, these were not two of the more severe years, and you can see that with the tar spot severity ratings at about 6%. But you do see a reduction, again, in symptoms here in those years, even so. And you do see a little bit of yield protection with that 3 mode of action compared to the 1 or 2 and the non-treated. So again, in this graph on the left, lower is better, that's disease severity. And the graph on the right, higher is better, that's yield. And again, this graph is also available on that CPN summary of the research, which is a very good resource. And I don't spend a lot of time talking about the products, but we do have fungicide efficacy charts that are put out each year on the Crop Protection Network website. And that's where, again, Madeline, myself, and other state extension crop pathologists, corn pathologists throughout the US are sharing their rating data and rating how well each of these fungicides does behave or control different diseases. And on that chart, you will find ratings for tar spot as well as southern rust and some of our other diseases with many of the common products today. And if you're not a QR code person, again, you can go to the Crop Protection Network and search for corn fungicide efficacy chart. And finally, I promise I'm not a spokesman for the Crop Protection Network, but it's just been a really good collaboration to get some of our resources together. And Kirsten Wise and Darren Mueller lead that. And one of the most recent developments on there is a fungicide return on investment calculator, where you can go and plug in your prices and your expected yield and try to work through decision making that way. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit now to talk a little bit about a study that we've done. We started this year to look at drone applications versus airplane applications for fungicides in corn. And I have to be honest, It wasn't until we started this study that I realized that there are some big hurdles in getting the plane to the field sometimes. In some parts of Missouri, I don't know how South Dakota is, but in some parts of Missouri, we have pilots who fly in a localized area, and it's less of a problem to get the plane there. But then we have parts of the state where we don't have any pilots nearby, and so they're only coming through one time in the year, and you have to make your decision then. And so if we can incorporate drones into this, it takes some of that pressure off of leaving the application up to the pilot's timing. Okay, so this is just 1 year of data, and it's in collaboration with Kevin Bradley at the University of Missouri. So he's a weed scientist, but he really likes technology, and he got into the drones and is allowing me to use them for fungicides in corn. So in this study, we did 3 locations in 3 parts of the state where those red stars are. And the individual plots, they were 60 or 90 foot wide in the farmer field. So we had to base the plots on the airplane swath. And that sometimes we didn't know till the day of what the swath was going to be. And then we adjusted and made the drone plots the same size. We had 4 replications of each treatment at each location. For each farmer, I believe, I can't remember how wide the combine headers were, maybe 30 foot, and we're going to harvest the middle 30 foot. When we go in to do yields on these, we're going to harvest the middle first, and then we're going to come to the edges. Okay, so we are only taking that middle data from each of those plots when we look at yields to ensure that we are getting a true representative of, hey, this was on drone applied corn. Hey, this was on airplane applied corn. Okay. Now, in these areas, it's really hard to get farmers not to apply fungicide where we've had tar spot before. So we don't have enough money to have non-treated strips in these fields. We are just doing the airplane versus the drone. And in these trials on-farm trials, cooperators select the products, the rate, and the timing that they want to do. We had 2 of the fields that were sprayed at VTR1, and then a second field we had sprayed at R2. Basically, there wasn't much tar spot there, and I was kind of hoping if we pushed it back a little bit, we could have a little more tar spot at that location. The same fungicide treatment and additives were sprayed by the drone and the airplane at each location on the same day. So this is not one of those things where the airplane went one day and then we came a day later with the drone. We were there waiting for the airplane to finish. Treatments were sprayed. There were 2 treatments. One was at 2 GPA and one was at 4 GPA, and the plane model and carrier volume varied by location. Okay, so here's the products that were chosen at each location. Again, the same products and rates were used in the drone as in the airplane. We put fungicide coverage cards out on the corn plants. So basically, you're looking at the cards and seeing how much of the fungicide made it onto the cards. And these are at 2 of our locations. Higher is better in this case because it would be better coverage. Okay, so the gold bars are the plane. Black is the drone at 2 gallons per acre, and gray is the drone at 4 gallons per acre. Okay, so what I can say from 2 locations of this so far, and we're going to repeat it this year, is that the drone is performing as well as the plane. It may even be performing a little bit better than the plane with regards to coverage at the leaf that's 2 leaves above the ear leaf. Okay, so what about tar spot disease severity? Well, we had one location where we had really good tar spot, and that's this Truxton location on the left, okay? Our Mound City and Green Ridge locations had what we would consider low tar spot disease severity. At that Truxton location, again, lower is better here because you want less disease severity. You can see the severity with the plane, and then with both the drone applications, it is reduced statistically. At Mound City, we do see a reduction again, though we had low tar spot pressure to begin with. So from this, again, along with those spray coverage cards, we can at least say that the drone seems to be performing as well, if not a little better than the plane when it comes to coverage on the leaves, both on the spray card and again with this tar spot severity. But what about yield, right? So in yield, similar results. So Truxton on the right is where we had that bad tar spot outbreak. Mound City and Green Ridge were not two of our tar spot. They were the sites with lower tar spot pressure. Again, higher is better here because this is yield and bushels per acre. You can see that the gold plain, there was an increase even at Mound City uh, compared to the plain with the 2 GPA. And then over at Truxton, where we had high tar spot pressure, we had an increase in the yield with the drone compared to the plane, okay? I don't want to overstate this data again because we only have 3 fields so far and we have to repeat this again. But I do feel comfortable saying the drone seems to be performing similarly to the plane. And probably a next question, at least the next question I usually get is, well, did you test helicopter? And the answer is not yet. We're trying to get our hands on a helicopter. In the middle of the season, it does take a little bit of work and convincing and sweet talk and product to get the pilots to slow down and work with us, just because they have a lot on their list too. So we're thankful for the 3 cooperators who were willing to work with us this year, and hopefully we can get some helicopters in the next year. Another trial that I just want to show you because you can do this on your own. It doesn't require me to be there. I would suggest talking to Madeline if you decide to do this to make sure you have parameters set up right. But what about the 1-pass versus 2-pass fungicide applications on tar spot? So one of the data points that we could use more data on is if you have that fungicide application at VTR1, and then you go back 2 to 3 weeks later. Okay, that's kind of where we need to get a little more data under high tar spot conditions. And so SARE has given us a grant proposal to partner with farmers to carry a 1-pass versus 2-pass fungicide application out on farmer fields in Missouri. And so we started this last year, and kind of the running joke is, if you do not want tar spot pressure on your field, let Mandy come and do an experiment there because you'll have low tar spot pressure. So we did not have high tar spot pressure this year, but again, I do want to show it because I think you can do this. You can do this on your own field. So the first application on this field, we had 8 of these this year, was at VTR1 with a plane. Again, we cannot talk our farmers into not having a fungicide, a non-treated check, and most of these because they are still pretty scared about tar spot. So the second application was made by a drone, which I was questioning at first, but now that we have our drone results from the previous study, I feel a little more comfortable with. And you can see these blocks. They were randomized complete blocks in the field, and you can see that second application, there is a little bit of a stay green effect there, okay? And so that's how it was done in each of these fields. When we go in again to look at yield, these are usually the widths, depending on the size of the field, we have to accommodate that, but we're always looking for to make the width of the blocks a size that works with the combine header. Okay, so it's going to take a little bit more time to come back and harvest these plots, but if you can get the combine to go through the middle of that block first, you're going to get some good data. And if you can make your block long enough that that you can leave out about 50 feet of yield data on either side, then you're going to get a really good estimate of what the yield is in this area compared to what the yield is in this area, and so forth. Okay. So on this study, again, we want our cooperators to do we want to answer their questions. So they're selecting the products and the rate. The first pass is at VTR1, and then that second pass 21 days after application. We do randomized complete block design with the drones, which is very helpful and something that we can't do when we're doing our strip trial passes with non-aerial equipment or with the plane. And we get 4 reps. And again, that block width is determined by the harvest equipment, what makes sense with the farmer, how big is the header that the farmer is using, and the length needs to be greater than 100 feet. Really, we'd like 500 feet. We can work with 100 feet, but you get much better data if you can make it 500 feet. The second pass was applied with the T40 at 2 gallons per acre, okay? And again, the running joke. So this is 2 of our trial sites summarized together. If you want tar spot, if you don't want tar spot, let Mandy do a strip trial. We were in areas that had tar spot pressure before, and it just didn't happen. This year we got kind of dry in August. And we had a really cool July, and then a hot week going into August. and we didn't see it. So tar spot, when we only had one pass, we did see about 1% severity. And when you had that two pass, you did see a reduction in the severity, but yield really was not going to be affected at that, okay? So right now we're working on the data for when we had low to moderate tar spot pressure. And this is again 2 more fields where we had an average of about 6% severity, and you see a reduction to 2%. And we're working on the yield to that, which in some ways is frustrating that I didn't show, but I really wanted to show this because I do think, you know, if we can use the drone for the second pass, then you can set up these strip trials for yourself. It's easy for me. I get it. It is easy for me to say, and all of our research data points to one fungicide application between BT and R3 is optimal, but my livelihood is not at stake. Rather than jump all in and go crazy with the fungicide applications, I really suggest doing something like this to test out what we say. And I've had this work successfully with some soybean trials. So showing you the data and then having farmers going and setting up their own soybean fungicide trials and seeing the results for themselves. So I would encourage you, if you're struggling with the information that we're giving you, to go ahead and think about setting up one of these trials yourself, if you can get a drone in to do 4 blocks for you. So in conclusion, don't panic. Panic can cost more than we think. You know, tar spot can occur and result in no yield losses. It also can occur and result in yield losses. So we don't want to be complacent either. We kind of want to be in the middle and make the best educated guess that we can. So is it going to cost yield? You're going to need to scout and monitor. You know, some of the questions we're having people think through as they're scouting, is the corn variety highly susceptible? If the corn variety is highly susceptible and you're starting to see tar spots show up, in the lower canopy, yeah, you probably need to be prepared to make that fungicide application, but you just don't want to jump the gun on it and go too early, which is going to be the temptation. I think at least it has been a temptation for some of our farmers who have had it bad. Again, the single VT to R3 fungicide application has been most consistent across university trials. And if you're having a hard time chewing on that or biting into that, again, I encourage you to go ahead and set up a small 1-pass versus 2-pass trial. Just work with someone who can help you make sure you're setting it up well so you can get that quality data. We don't want the 1-pass to be on the edge or the border rows and the 2-pass to be in the middle. That's not going to give you the data that you need to see to make a decision. We want to set it up correctly. Finally, products with multiple modes of action and longer residual activity have performed most consistently. And the drone applications seem to be as effective as plain applications and may even provide a little bit more protection. And with that, just want to thank you all again for your time today and thank you for the invitation to be here. I hope you've gathered something, and I'm always glad to answer questions or take questions. And you all have a great state extension pathologist in Madeline, so don't be afraid to reach out to her during the season too. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I don't see any questions in Q&A or chat just yet. We will give everybody a couple minutes to kind of process and decide what they may have questions on. So, oh, right there. Are you going to have a sign up for the March meeting? That is on the QR code that Connie Shrunk shared in the chat. If you'll click that link, it will take you straight to that. One of the questions I was going to ask is, what is the earliest y'all have seen tar spot in Missouri? Has it been that June time point?
Yeah, so and it was mid-June, and it was again in 2023, and so we were really not expecting it. We were in severe drought where we weren't even seeing dew on leaves. And somebody said, I have tar spot, and you know, like a terrible pathologist, I said, no, you have insect poop, just scratch it off. And I was wrong, but I admit it. And so that gets really tempting, right? To spray when you first see it, and it's just not gonna, you're gonna have to go back out. Yeah.
And here in South Dakota in 24, we were very droughty in, August, September, October, right up until harvest. And that was when we started seeing tar spot in the state, and it kind of spread all across the state varying levels of infection kind of down in our southeast counties, so a little bit closer to you.
Yeah.
It was really, really bad in a few fields, kind of what I saw in your fields when we were there in 23. I walked
Yes.
in and I said, "Oh, this is as bad as Missouri. I did never expect to see that in South Dakota."
Right. Yeah.
Um, so that can probably tell those who are listening my comparison levels of South Dakota versus Missouri. Missouri was my comparison of really bad
Uh-uh.
infection. Something that's
Great.
really interesting here in South Dakota is we actually don't see the fisheyes. We've been
Okay.
into tons of fields and we haven't seen a fisheye around the lesion at all, which has been just kind of interesting to monitor. It's the weird things that the grad students pick up, but that's been
Yeah.
one of the things that she's noted a lot.
Well, I wonder to your point. So in Missouri, we're starting to see it spread further south. And is the fisheye a sign of adapting or like maybe it's something where that appears in the warmer areas or something? We're kind of wondering about its adaptability, the fungus's adaptability. So there might be something there.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's just been something that we're watching and I know Andrew Friskop from North Dakota State's also going to kind of listen in on that March meeting because they got it, I think, in 10 or 12 counties up in North Dakota at the end of the season too. And both of us were like, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, like help. Yes. That's and I think when I think back to when they first started doing research on it again, the reactive like what do we do? Um they it's changed a little bit like there was you had to spray at VTR1, like that was the rule. And as we learn more about it, it's like okay, maybe we have a little bit bigger window to make that optimal application. We don't have to quite panic on that either. So,
Yeah. But yeah, it's great having all of these experiences from other states because we're just really starting to kind of see what tar spot's going to have to do here.
mhm,
Um, we also have a little study going to see if tar spot can overwinter on residues here.
mhm.
As you mentioned, there's a good chance I think that it might, but we thought that we would verify that and see what happens.
As you should, as you should. We're working on corn stunt disease
Oh,
with
yeah.
those leaf hoppers, which kind of was our scare in
Yeah.
2024, and whether they can overwinter. And the thought is they can't, but let's just
Yeah.
make sure, yeah, and see what the viability is after that.
Yeah, definitely. On the corn stunt front, um, that should be kind of interesting. I will include a couple things on that we're doing as a diagnostic group over the summer. But corn stunt, if you're still listening in, is one we confirmed one county with it in 2024 here in South Dakota. And you had how many counties, Mandy?
Well, I think we ended up confirming it in 11, and then we stopped doing the diagnostic, but we saw the corn leaf hoppers in about 95% of the state by the time it was done. So, and
Yeah.
symptoms that corresponded to corn.
And whenever we started monitoring for the leaf hoppers after we got our positive, we saw it in probably 60 or 70% of the counties here in South Dakota. So don't like leaf hoppers don't always mean that the disease is present, but in high disease years, it means that there's a chance. So if you're still here, corn stunt is one that we will be looking into. You do have a question. Do you see drone application of fungicides as they will be widely adopted in the future?
It's a good question, and I think it's hard to know because number one, some of the policies on pesticide applications with drones are behind the actual drone usage, right? So there is this unknown up there um, at the federal level, but I do think that if there is a place for them, I think in corn makes sense as far as the fungicide applications go. Just based on the practicality of getting it there, especially if the coverage is going to be as good as the plane, it could be a very good complement.
Yeah, Wade Webster spoke on Tuesday about white mold, and he's
Mhm.
also doing or has been involved in some trials doing helicopter versus drone. And he was also saying that the drone is at least
Yeah.
comparable to the helicopter application. So that was pretty interesting to kind of listen to him talk about that. And then you today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So I'm not a technology person, to be honest. I wasn't excited, and now I'm like, okay, maybe it's a good thing we did this, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask them. And if it's not just about tar spot, if you have other corn questions or whatever, we've got a few minutes here and we can answer them. Did y'all have to make any applications for Southern Rest in Missouri, or did it stay yes?
Yeah, so we saw southern rust, and usually we see southern rust along the Missouri River. Again, there's something about the wind stream that just brings it up that way. But this year we saw it in new places, and actually in some of our areas where we usually have tar spot really bad, we had more southern rust. And so it was kind of exciting. We had enough southern rust in some of our trials to actually rate for it as a disease. I know I'm not supposed to think that, but as a pathologist, I think that because it can
Yeah.
give data to everyone. But yeah,
Yeah.
so there were some like the corn leaf hoppers had to move up from the south. Southern rust has to move up from the south. Did it all come with Hurricane Beryl? Maybe. Yeah. But yeah, I was surprised when you said that you all had southern rust too.
Yeah, it was definitely, there were counties where the Southern Rust, even it was considerably worse than the tar spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
uh,
think that's another thing. Like we're looking through the lens of tar spot.
mhm.
Southern rust can be just as aggressive. So if you're, like, and I think most of the data towards southern rust says closer to that VTR1 timing than it
Yeah,
later. So yeah, putting those two together. If I That's what I tell my farmers. If we're worried about a tar spot, let's push a little bit towards R2. If
yeah,
southern rust is the concern, let's push a little bit more towards VT R1 if we have it within our control. Yeah.
yeah. And, that is the one upside, I guess, to South Dakota being as far north as we are. Those southern diseases take a long while to make it
Time
up
to
to
get there.
us. And
Yeah.
we started seeing southern rust, very light infections, mid to late July. And then we probably weren't seeing heavy infections of southern rust until mid-August.
Hmm.
And at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of fungicide control options, but we were able to, document it and report that, hey, we saw southern rust in all of these counties. So that was just, again, you're out scouting for tar spot, you might as well take stock of all of the other diseases.
Yeah. And I think those maps are a little alarming. If you look at southern rust 5 years ago compared to southern rust now, it's similarly alarming. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I guess, I've been asked a few times, can you predict what tar spot's going to look like? And I appreciated you also pointing out that the weather is just, it's too unpredictable. We're not going to know what tar spot's going to do until we really get into the weather pattern for the year.
Um, I
Um,
think there's a catch 22. We have some really good retailers out there who have been proactive in scouting for tar
yeah.
spot, and that might have cost some farmers potentially too by being too proactive in seeing those first lesions because yeah, even if you see those first lesions, like in Missouri, we see it in June and then it does not take off. Like there's a latency period and then
Mhm.
we see that take off later. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we here last year, like I said, I think it started around mid-August down in our very far southeast counties. And then pretty much from September 1 to harvest for us, it just kept popping up in every county. And
yeah.
so I'm like, well, did we kind of have, a 2 week latency period from the time that it got introduced until it finally got to levels where it was moving across the state?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
So
we still have a lot to learn.
we do. I
But
mean, in the context of diseases, we've really only known about this one for 10 years this year. So, and
right.
I've done a lot, but
And we
all
haven't had an epidemic. Like that's what when you look at in Indiana, 2015 it was found, 2018 was their first epidemic. In
Mhm,
Missouri, 2018, and then it was about 4 years later when we first started seeing or experiencing our real substantial yield losses. So I do think
mhm.
it did cause a little bit of complacency among some of our farmers, like
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
were
we found it in the first 6 counties in 2022, but I have heard reports since that some people think they saw it in 2021.
so you're
Um,
close to that enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had 6 counties that we confirmed in 22, like right at harvest, and then only 3 counties in 2023, and then 46 counties in 2024. So,
Yeah.
we've hit that like big increase, but I don't know if that's going to, if it was just, a great year for airborne diseases in 24 or, you
Yeah.
know, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And that's why we're being proactive and learning
Yeah.
about that stuff.
Yes. Yes.
But well, we are right at 11 o'clock. So thank you so much for speaking today, Mandy. It was great. And I love getting to listen to what you're doing a little bit further south.
Thank you
And
for having me today.
yeah, so I guess with that, we are good to go and we will go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks for attending, everyone, today.